Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Green. I'd like to welcome you to Reading the River. This event is part of the Nature City Festival, which is started today and is going on all week until May 28th. And there are more than 50 nature-inspired events taking place in this festival. If you want to find out more about what's happening, you can go to the website, wildaboutsaskatoon.org, and there's a schedule there. And I'd also like to draw your attention to one event in particular, the keynote address by Maud Barlow, the renowned Canadian writer and water activist. That's happening this Thursday at 7 o'clock at the Roxy Theatre. And you can get free tickets to that on the same website. Before you leave tonight, you're invited to fill out a short evaluation form, and you'll be entered into a draw for some great door prizes. Well, I'm here with the Saskatoon Unitarian Singers, and we're going to start this evening by sharing a couple songs that speak to the importance of water in our lives. But first, it's important to acknowledge that we are gathered here on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional lands of the Métis and First Nations peoples. As we engage in land-based education, we want to respect the history of this place and affirm our commitment to move towards a healthy future with relationships embedded in mutual recognition and respect between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Is anybody hearing anything through the speakers? No.
The guitar you're not going through it.
All right, we'll put unplugged.
Yeah, unplugged, all right.
We are the we are one.
Change the slide, sorry.
The river is a healer, the river is a sage. The river knows no end and the river feels no age. The river is a leader every single day. It's living in the moment and it always finds a way. Water heal my body, water heal my soul. When I go down to the water, by the water I feel whole. The river calls me over, it's calling out my name. In the day and in the night I hear that river all the same. It's calling me over, calling out my pain. Oh, a river gathers tears just like a river gathers rain. Water heal my body, water heal my soul. When I go down to the water, by the water I feel whole. The river is a traveler, always on the go. Oh, a river never worries if it's fast or if it's slow. A river take me to where I need to go, and I will just relax and let the river flow. Water heal my body, water heal my soul. When I go down to the water, by the water I feel whole. Water heal my body, water heal my soul. I feel whole. Water heal my body, heal my body, heal my soul. By the water I feel whole. When I go down to the water, by the water I feel whole.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for that lovely, lovely performance. Really beautiful music, and what a privilege to hear you all sing tonight. And lovely welcoming
Mike.
in terms of.
Is that better?
Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. I don't want to yell into it. Thank you for the lovely music, and it's a lovely opening for, I think, what's going to be a very special night. And thank you, everybody, for coming out to join us for this very special event. I was thinking while you all were singing that you never know where life is going to lead you, because I grew up on the banks of the Cheat River in West Virginia in the United States. And in my very early years, I was a whitewater raft guide on that river. It's one of the last remaining free-flowing rivers in the eastern part of the United States. And I was thinking that the very first rapid, when you go down that particular river, when you're paddling it, is called Decision. Because at that point in the river, it's the place where if you decide you don't want to keep going, you can still walk out. Because once you're committed to the canyon, you can't really walk out anymore. And I thought, wow, that's just a great metaphor for life. Like, we all have to make these active decisions. Do we keep going or do we get out? And I think about where we are here right today on the banks of the South Saskatchewan River, another really major river, and what an amazing life force that is here, and something that we're going to celebrate as part of the festival that's going on right now, and as part of the amazing inspiration, I think, the things that we're going to hear from Basia here tonight. So you never know where life is going to lead you, and so here we are on the banks of another really amazing river, having made decisions about being here. And what brought me here from the United States was the opportunity to be here at the University of Saskatchewan, because there were so many amazing opportunities through this university to do different and creative things. And we're going to celebrate one of those different and creative things here tonight. Susan Shantz, who is our host here tonight, Graham Strickert, who was part of the class that allowed Basia to be with us here tonight, is part of an incredibly creative effort to bring science and art together, and to expose scientists to artists and artists to scientists, and to help us learn together. One of the great things about science is that it makes you think, and one of the great things about art is that it makes you feel, just like the music we just heard. And the opportunity to bring those things together in an academic environment and to share it with our local community, like we're doing here, is a real privilege. So, without any further ado, I want to turn it over to Susan so she can introduce Basia, so we can really get into this amazing experience that we will all share tonight. So Susan, thank you so much for having me and for allowing me to be here, and for the rest of us.
Thanks so much, Toddy. It's been a real pleasure for me. I'm Susan Shantz in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Saskatchewan. And I've had the pleasure over the past year and a half of getting to know Toddy and my colleague Graham Strickert in the School of the Environment and Sustainability. I'm working with them on a project about the deltas and kind of art as a way to get information and knowledge out to communities and kind of create community engaged art projects. And that actually led to Graham and I coming up with this idea for the course Becoming Water, and some of the students are here tonight. And we all just returned from an amazing 4 days up in the Saskatchewan River Delta up at Cumberland House. And Basia was up there with us, and it kind of occurred to me partway into planning the course that it would be really neat to invite Basia, whose work has been in eco art and water, to be part of the course and to come and give a public lecture here in Saskatoon. So I'll introduce Basia in a moment, but I do need to thank all these wonderful people at the University of Saskatchewan who've made this possible. The School of the Environment and Sustainability, Toddy, and the College of Arts and Science, the Interdisciplinary Center for Culture and Creativity, provided a linking fellowship, which is how Basia got to be here. And let me see, what else do I have here? The Broadway Theatre for hosting this. The Guanama Center for Teaching Excellence actually provided a lot of support for the class, for all of us to do the field trip up to the Delta, tomorrow to the Gardner Dam. So really wonderful support from the Guanama Center. We also, up at the Delta, I don't know if people here are familiar with Ian Tabe's film about the Saskatchewan River Delta. I think it might be screening in Saskatoon mid-July with the River Rendezvous Festival. But Ian was up at the Delta with us, and he's making a short documentary about the students working up there that we also hope to screen mid-July. So look for that. It might be at the Roxy, I think. I'm really pleased now to introduce Basia Irland, who's here from New Mexico. Basia is a Fulbright scholar, an author, a poet, a sculptor, an installation artist, and an activist who creates international water projects. She has 2 books out, one that just came out, published in the Netherlands, called Reading the River, The Ecological Activist Art of Basia Irland, and another book, earlier book, called Water Library. Through her work, Irland offers a creative understanding of water while examining how communities of people, plants, and animals rely on this vital element. She's Professor Emerita at the University of New Mexico, where she founded the Art and Ecology program. I actually met Basia, maybe like 30 years ago when I was a young art student at the University of Waterloo. And it was kind of right at the end of Basia's time there. I think she taught there for 17 years and then took the position at the University of New Mexico. So I had the pleasure of meeting her then, but I haven't really seen her since, and it just kind of occurred to me, I kind of kept track of her work over the years, that it would be really fun to call her out of the blue and see if she could come up here, and lo and behold, she could, which was really wonderful. Basia blogs about global rivers for the National Geographic, and she will be blogging about the Saskatchewan River and is working on that while she's here. You can find more about her work on her website, which is just her name, basiairland.com. After Basia's talk, there'll be a bit of time for question and answers, which Graham Stricker will moderate. So please join me in welcoming Basia Irland.
Thanks, Susan, and thank you, Graham. I'm very honored to be here and to have been able to participate in the past 4 days up at the wonderful, wonderful Saskatchewan River Delta area. I also want to thank the choir. That was fantastic, and the lyrics were just perfect, especially "By the water I feel whole." I'm just like on the verge of tears even saying that out loud because it's how I feel so strongly. I've worked with water for a lot of years. So I would like all of you to grab a paddle, get in your canoe or your kayak, and join me as we float downstream this evening. And as we float downstream, keep this thought in mind. My son, Derek, is standing at a podium in the middle of the Rio Grande. He is tweaking a well-known quote. "Ask not what this river can do for you, but what you can do for this river." These are the arteries within my body and within all of your bodies. And these are the rivers of New Mexico, where I live. We are water. Our bodies hold streams: sweat, blood, tears, urine. Water enters, circulates within us, and leaves. Each of us is a walking river, sloshing along with damp insides, held together by paper-thin skin. Our water future will depend upon a commitment to, this is a lot of alliteration, creative actions, constellations of diversity, collaboration and cooperation, community and culture, compassion within academic circles. This is a term we don't hear very often, but is super important. Conservation and communication. This woman is bringing water from the Narmada River in India at dawn. Around the world, women are traditionally the carriers of water, having to walk for hours to a source that is often highly polluted. Global refugees have been forced to flee cities with infrastructure that has been destroyed. And then in refugee camps, there is the constant struggle to find enough water to survive. This scarf, which I'm wearing tonight, was given to me by a close friend from Syria. It was made in Aleppo. And it always reminds me not to take anything for granted. All of us rely on water, from the smallest ant to this magnificent friend of mine resting in the Rapti River in southern Nepal, who unfortunately is infected with schistosomiasis, also known as bilharzia, a waterborne disease. Recently, and this just happened last month, rivers have been granted the same legal status as a person. The Maori in New Zealand have fought for 140 years to have their ancestral river, the Wanganui, given legal rights as a living entity. And now, the high courts in India have also ruled to grant the same legal rights as a human to the Ganges and Yamuna rivers, meaning that if anyone harms or pollutes the rivers, the law would view it as no different than harming a person. I hope during the Q&A we can talk about this a bit, because this is really important and it's so recent, having just happened last month. Although the Rio Grande is flowing at a really high CFS right now due to large quantities of snowmelt upstream, for those of us who live in the arid desert of New Mexico, there is sometimes not enough water. This is the Rio Grande near Socorro, south of Albuquerque, where I live, several summers ago, which has become nothing but a river of sand. So imagine, just for a moment, if this would be what the Saskatchewan River here in Saskatoon might someday look like. It is important to know where our water comes from. In Western cultures, we often take water for granted. We get up each day, just like we all did this morning, take a shower, brush our teeth, flush the toilet, without much thought where that water comes from and how grateful we need to be for every single drop. The Gathering of Waters projects connect people by handing a canteen and logbook, person to person, along the entire length of a river. These actions are not about planning seminars in boardrooms or endless discussions indoors in offices. It requires getting one's feet wet, experiencing this body of water firsthand. The gatherings help to establish ongoing networks and partnerships and help participants get into the mud, muck, complexities, and eddies around each bend in the river's turn. The canteen and logbook travel the river by boat, bus, bike, car, on horseback, on foot, and even by hot air balloon. Here people are logging into the logbook and adding their personal stories about the river. The gathering along the Rio Grande took 5 years to do. The river begins its 1,875-mile journey in southern Colorado, flows through New Mexico, and becomes the border between Texas and Mexico. The Santa Fe Indian School track team here is running 150 miles as they carried water from the Pueblo of Taos to the Pueblo of Isleta in 2 days. At each pueblo, there was an exchange of river water and a shared meal. The emphasis with each gathering is about process, grassroots, collaborative, and locally based actions. So I often work with scientists in various communities where I'm invited. This was in Boulder, Colorado, a biogeochemist. We almost always go to the sewage treatment plant, and I know all of you in the class went last week. It's really important to understand that the outflow from the water treatment plants provide large tributaries to rivers. In New Mexico, the sewage treatment plant is the 5th largest tributary to the Rio Grande, and this is a river that's 2,000 miles long. We do video documentaries. We plant trees, lots of trees, because of the symbiotic relationship between rivers and plants, and I'm going to talk about plants in a little bit. We do water testing. We take water samples and do the testing. This is in West Virginia, an area that Toddy knows well. This is at the source of Decker's Creek, which is a very small creek. At the source, the river is very clean. It's drinkable. If you walk 5 miles downstream, this is what you run into. As a visual artist, this image is really hard for me to look at because it looks as if the river is physically bleeding, like that river is hurting. This is, whoops, how do I go back? This is acid mine drainage from an abandoned coal mine. And unfortunately, I hate to say that I'm from the United States these days, but our government is going to make this kind of thing even worse. So the pH level at the source, where I showed you that we were gathering, was 7.7, which is really good drinking water quality. If you count down about 7 of those to where it says Richard, that's the Richard mine, the image that I showed you. You can see there that the pH level drops to 4.2. That's not battery acid level, but it is certainly not healthy quality. There are backpack repositories created for each of the gathering projects. Each repository holds data, photographs, watershed maps, clay samples, water tests, the canteen, the logbook, video documentaries, and art objects. This was the one created for Boulder Creek. I always use local materials, whatever has to do with the site. If any of you have ever visited Boulder, Colorado, you know that with Boulder Creek, people really enjoy tubing down the creek. They take truck inner tubes and go down the creek because it's too shallow for canoes or kayaks. And so I bought a truck inner tube and made the backpack out of that. It was a really wonderful material to work with. You could sew it, you could glue it, you could cut it. It was really interesting. And the creek itself is only 47 miles long, so there are 47 containers of river water at the bottom. This was the one for Nisqually River in Washington, made out of cedar, so it smells really good. Kit for paddling through stars floating on a lake, done in northern Quebec. I was canoeing every morning and decided that I wanted to carve my own paddles, so these are carved out of lime wood or lindenwood. Seed repository for the Big Wood River in Idaho. When I was working on the Oconee River in Georgia, I was working closely with a biologist whose specialty was algae. And so I learned about this particular shape, which is the navicula, and a diatom. I really love this form because it's like the form of a boat. So I made the backpack out of that. It's also coated with diatomaceous earth. Apothecary for creeks and other living beings. I do believe that our creeks and streams and rivers are alive. They're just as alive as we are. So this is the one. This will look familiar to all the students in the class. This was the one that was constructed by the 3 wonderful graduate students up at the Saskatchewan River Delta region. It's made out of red willow. It's actually very comfortable to walk in. I really enjoyed the details that the students made the decisions to use. For instance, this is a stick that has been chewed by deer. These were the bottles, the glass containers that held the various seeds that are local to the region. And these are the three marvelous graduate students who constructed this work, and I'm very grateful to them. I really love this piece. I believe in gifting, in the idea of reciprocity. So for each one of the projects that I do, there is a gift that is made for the people. This was the one for Boulder Creek, and because people in Boulder tend to bike everywhere, these are made out of bicycle inner tubes. The one for the Rio Grande is made out of clay that was gathered along the entire length of the river and then made into small canteens with a little bit of river water in each one. And sometimes the making of the gifts themselves becomes a community activity. They always include watershed maps and seeds. We are this river of turquoise flowing to the sea. We are the water pent up behind a dam. We are the language of salmon bones in the night sky. Each of us is the book of drought. And we are a barnacle-encrusted volume studied intently by Darwin. Thought I'd show you my outdoor studio. I try not to be indoors anytime I can, so with my work it's always outdoors as much as possible. Ice receding, go back. Ice receding, books receding, emphasizes the necessity of collective effort, scientific knowledge, and poetic intervention to deal with the complex issues of climate disruption and watershed restoration through the release of seed-laden ephemeral ice sculptures into rivers. So we all know that our glaciers are melting. I spent a lot of time in the Northwest along the Nisqually River. This is the Nisqually Glacier. I really like the fact that this is called the tongue, so it directly relates to our own bodies. That glacier up there used to go for miles and miles and miles all the way down into the valley. Now it has melted almost up to the top of Mount Rainier. That glacier is birthing the Nisqually River. You can see it right there. When that glacier disappears, so does the river. So as a way to help make this visible, I decided that I wanted to carve books out of ice. And because there's so much doomsday and negativity around global warming, climate change, the melting of our glaciers, I wanted to embed something positive in it. So each one of these is embedded with local native riparian seeds as a way to address a few of the things that we can do to help counterbalance some of that, which is to plant seeds. This was the one done for Boulder Creek. It weighs 300 pounds. Done along the Rio Grande with cottonwood seeds. This also is a tome, weighs 250 pounds. I've done these all over the world. This is the one for, this is in Belgium, in the Netherlands, France, Ottawa. Another one for Ottawa. You can tell because it has the maple leaves on it, the seeds. And then there was a group of women environmental artists in Iran who wanted to create their own ice book. So we worked via the internet, and they designed their ice book and they put it into their local stream there. It was a really nice way to work. And someday I will go over and visit with them. Sometimes the books are closed, and sometimes they're open. The seeds form an international ecological language, a restoration text. And this one was really fun to do. I used cottonwood seeds on it, but for those of you who are academics, you now have a new way to write your footnotes. So I put footnotes on the bottom of this using riparian grasses. This little girl was fantastic. She totally understood. We have her on video talking about this, about the melting of this piece, the words, the text, the fact that you could turn the pages, which of course you couldn't. But she was just amazing. I think she understood this work a lot better than most of the adults did. So all of these ice books are gifted to rivers. They're usually launched from shore, but when we were in Ohio, they were launched from a flotilla of kayaks. And this will look familiar to the students. This was up at the Delta region when they created their own ice books, and so we were launching these into the Saskatchewan River up there. I want to say something about ephemerality, because I'm often asked why it is that I put so much time and effort into something that's going to melt away. Translator David Hinton describes ancient Chinese poets who, as a form of spiritual practice, would write on rocks and trees with water-soluble ink that would wash away in the rain, so the poem was complete only when it vanished. This is how I feel about the ice books. Each of us is only on this earth for a short period of time, and it's wondrous to embrace the ephemerality of our own existence. Almost all my projects are co-created in collaboration with community, so I'm going to just show you a few pictures. This was along the Rio Grande. This was on the Oconee River in Georgia. And this was the Great Miami River in Ohio. And what we're doing is toasting the river. Again, since I think of the rivers as being alive, this is a way to thank the river. So what we're saying is, may you flow, and may you always flow clean. Stream ecologist, river restoration biologist, and botanist help to ascertain the best seeds for each specific riparian zone. So you can read along with me up there. Plants sequester carbon. They mitigate floods and drought, pollinate other plants, disperse seeds. One of the last books that Thoreau ever wrote is called Faith in a Seed. It was published after his death, and a lot of that book is talking about the way that various seeds are dispersed. Create soil regeneration and preservation, act as filters for pollutants and debris, supply leaf litter for food and habitat. A friend of mine did her entire doctoral thesis on leaf litter. Promote aesthetic pleasure, hold the banks in place to slow erosion, and provide shelter, shade for riverside organisms, including us. So I could talk for several hours just about seeds alone. I think they are amazing miniature sculptures. I'm going to just talk about one. So this is the text on here, which I really like. It's definitely not English, it's not Russian. It could be perhaps Urdu, maybe it's Arabic. What formed that text is this tiny little seed that's just about an inch high. It's called the mountain mahogany. What happens is that it falls off of the bush onto the ground. Anytime there is moisture, you can see those little seeds on it, the hairs on it. The hairs expand and contract, and it literally drills itself into the ground, which is how it plants itself. To me, that's just completely miraculous that this little tiny thing has that embedded within it, that it's able to do that. I've worked a lot for a number of decades on various forms of polluted waters, primarily waterborne diseases. So this is very common. This is something that we would see anywhere. This happens to be the River Scheldt in Belgium. But for some reason, and this is something that I still can't really wrap my head around, people tend to think that they can just throw whatever they want into a body of water and it will disappear. There is no away anymore. This always comes back to us. So these are the kind of signs that we see everywhere. We can't eat the shellfish, we can't eat the fish, we can't swim, and our children cannot even play in the water. This river looks bucolic, right? However, the Calaveras River in California is full of toxic pesticides. After canoeing each day for several weeks with a river keeper on the Calaveras, which by the way means River of Skulls, and taking water samples, I commissioned a composer to write a song for cello and mezzo-soprano. These are the words the soprano sang. The chemical names for the pesticides that find their way into rivers from large agricultural businesses upstream. Have any of you ever had Giardia? Yes, I knew there had to be at least one. Usually in an audience this size, there's half a dozen people who've had Giardia. Have you had Giardia? Yep. Okay. It's not fun. I happened to get mine in Indonesia. You can get it anywhere. In New Mexico, it's called beaver fever because it's usually spread by the feces of animals. So when I got it, I got really interested in waterborne diseases. I started going over to the medical library. I was studying these big medical atlases that were for parasitologists. So this is what a skin sample infected with Giardia looks like. Guinea worm is a really interesting parasite. This particular picture I happened to take in a step well in India. If any of you want to Google step wells in India, they are beautiful architectural structures. The problem is that usually the women are barefoot, they walk down in there, and oftentimes the water is infected, so they end up getting sick. So the Carter Center in Atlanta has been doing a lot to try to eradicate guinea worm, and they have been really, really successful. It is almost completely eradicated. But whenever somebody does get it, it's very, very painful. So it says on this, inside the human body, guinea worms can grow up to 3 feet in length. They cause excruciating pain when they emerge through blisters on the skin. So what happens is they get into your body. I love telling my students this story. They get into your body, and then when they get to be about this long, they decide that they're going to emerge from your body. So either someplace on your arm, usually it's your thigh, the worm will actually start emerging. So what you do is you take a stick and you begin wrapping the worm around the stick to help it emerge. That can take several weeks for it to actually come out of your skin. So it's really a horrible disease. It affects the economy of the village. It affects all the people who can't work because they get sick. Since the initial outbreak of cholera in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, at least 9,000, it's hard for me to wrap my head around these numbers, 9,000 people have died and more than 900,000 have been ill from cholera. Various waterborne diseases kill a child somewhere in the world every 8 seconds. So if you think from the time that the choir was up here and Toddy was talking and Susan was talking and now me talking, how many children that is around the world that have died just in that period of time from a waterborne disease. It's really huge. This is my one sexy picture. Get ready. These are schistosomes copulating. I had a grant with the chair of biology to go to Nepal to do a video documentary about schistosomiasis or bilharzia. This was one of the parasitologists I was working with while I was over there. And what we're looking at through the microscope is this, elephant dung. So you remember that elephant that I showed you at the very beginning? We were collecting their dung in order to be able to study it through the microscope. I often work with musicians in various countries where I am. So this was in Kathmandu. What we were doing, we were writing 2 songs, one about the sick elephant and another about schistosomiasis and how to avoid getting schisto. So this was at Lake Tana, which is the source of the Blue Nile in Ethiopia. Again, that lake back there looks very bucolic. However, it's strongly infected with bilharzia. So what the musicians here are doing is, again, writing a song in their language, which is Amharic, about how to avoid contracting schistosomiasis. These songs are then taken out into their local communities and sung. So it's an educational way for people to learn about how to avoid getting these waterborne diseases. Last year I had a large retrospective at a museum in the Netherlands. We did some ice books there. One of the things I really respect about rivers is that they do not understand borders. So this was fun. On the left is the Netherlands. We would walk across. On the right, we were in Belgium. It was a huge show. It took up the entire museum, but I'm literally only going to talk about a couple of pieces. This room I want to talk about because I've just been telling you about the waterborne diseases. On the right-hand wall, particularly, I want to show you these. Those are some of the scrolls that have images, enlarged images of the pathogens on them. And these were the ones that I did in India and Nepal. What I did was to use sari silk from the women wear their saris, because they can actually take this silk and you can fold it over a number of times like this and use that as a filter for water. It's not effective for the really small pathogens, but for the large ones, it's a way to begin to filter the water. This was a series of 7 pieces that I did called contemplation stations. So we had outdoor chairs, and then we used the local willows and river reeds and wrapped the chairs. This was the one that was inside in the museum at the foot of this long, I really wanted to have a reflecting pool inside the museum. So they hired 8 workers in order to build this in the museum. It was great. And all the others are placed outdoors besides rivers, so that you can just come up on them and find them in the woods as you're walking beside the river. This one was really fun because we put it beside the river and we came back 2 weeks later and it was physically in the river. So I like the fact that you'd have to wade out into the river in order to sit in it. This was done on the facade of the museum. It's entitled Below. As we know, most of the Netherlands is below sea level. So with climate change, this entire museum someday may be underwater. What we did was to project flowing water onto the windows at night so people walking by could see it, and sound was projected out onto the street so anybody walking by could see the visual and hear the sound of the running water. I've been really, really blessed the past 2 years to have been invited to write for National Geographic and to write blogs about international rivers. These are written in the first person from the perspective of the river. I am the Yaqui River in Mexico, polluted with noxious pesticide runoff from large agricultural businesses upstream. I witness poor families forced to purchase drinking water since none is available within the homes. This is a necessity that should be free and a given right for all people. I am the Nisqually River in Washington State, where decades of legal battles led to one of the most important Indian laws ever passed. The Bolt decision affirms Nisqually off-reservation fishing rights. I am the Narmada River, India, where pilgrims walk barefoot and carry all their worldly possessions as they circumambulate my entire body in a 2 to 3 year journey of over 1,600 miles. My natural flow is blocked at the Sardar Sarovar Dam, one of the largest in the world, where my reservoir has displaced over 1 million Adivasi, or original inhabitants of the region, mostly poor indigenous tribal people, whose entire culture and livelihood are at stake. I am the Saskatchewan River Delta, the largest inland river delta in North America, covering about 10,000 square kilometers. I am larger than the Everglades National Park, and yet have almost no protection. I provide habitat for hundreds of species of birds, mammals, and fish. Millions of birds pass through my delta waters annually. However, and this is a huge however, I am threatened by man-made dams, which reverses my natural flow regime, stops sediment transport, and starves the region of nutrients. As the productivity of my marshes decline, many of the indigenous cultural ways of surviving also decline. Fortunately, there are some people fighting for my survival, including the indigenous voices of such passionate advocates as Gary and Karen Carrier. And scientists, including Graham Strickard, who help raise awareness that I exist, allowing me to continue to sustain many critical ecosystem functions. I will end this talk with Desert Fountain. I was commissioned by the Albuquerque Museum in New Mexico to create a fountain, but I refused because I would have to use potable groundwater, which is precious in the arid high desert. After a month, I called the museum director back and asked if I could put a stock tank on the roof of the museum. And much to my surprise, he said yes. The water flows from the tank to a set of cast bronze arms. They were modeled after my arms, like this. So the water drips from one hand to the next, and then outside the museum to water plants. The only time this fountain works is when there has been moisture, thereby making the ecosystem where I live visible. In this radically interconnected world, it becomes our collective responsibility to compassionately take care of each other and our environment. It is our responsibility to ensure that the next generations will have enough clean water to survive and to thrive. Thank you.
You guys look like a pretty rough crowd, so I have to moderate. Do we have any questions? That was really wonderful. Oh, you can still hear me okay. Do we have any questions? Yeah, right here.
Yeah, my family and I do a lot of camping and canoeing, and that always makes us much more conscious about our use of water. You know, you have to filter water to drink, and you use water for washing very sparingly and carefully, because you have to work to make it usable. And yet in the city, we chlorinate all the water we use, no matter what purpose it's used for. And my spouse and I often talk about, isn't there a better way to do this? You know, do we really need to be chlorinating water that is used for washing our clothes or putting on our gardens? Are you aware of anywhere in the world that approaches this differently in cities?
Well, I can address one, not the chlorination part, but the use of water differently. Actually, Susan and I were having a discussion about this yesterday. When I was in India, I was staying with a friend of mine in Ahmedabad who is upper-class Brahmin. We were staying at the university where she teaches. And when I got up in the morning and wanted to take a shower, we went into the bathroom. There were two buckets. There was one bucket if you wanted to take a shower. There was another bucket if you wanted to wash your hair. So there were two buckets of water. And again, it's the way that we tend to think about water, which, like when you're camping and you have limited water, then you think about it all the time. I live in the high desert of New Mexico and Arizona. California had a drought for many years. Now that has changed because of, anyway, it's all changed, so they've had floods now instead. I think a lot of it is just awareness and not taking the water for granted. Because like the picture that I showed you of the Rio Grande, when that water isn't there, then all of a sudden we begin to think about it in a very different way. So maybe, Graham, you can address the chlorination issue.
Probably not the best person actually to address that, but I can say we had an amazing tour of the water treatment plant. We actually went upstream, not downstream, to the water treatment plant with the class, and we learned how much actually goes into getting the water to us, you know, just at the water treatment plant. And then there's the whole distribution, and they do chlorinate in some cases for the distribution system. But now in most parts of Canada, they can actually discharge chlorinated water back into the river. So the students in the class are actually going to experiment with a medium of the cakes that come from the process of taking the chlorine out of the water before it discharges back into the river in Saskatoon. And they're going to use that as an art medium to sort of raise awareness that, you know, this is something that the city's doing that's actually quite positive in Saskatoon. In a lot of places, they're also looking at grey water systems, so not actually chlorinating or not actually using all water for potable water, which I think is a step in the right direction, and maybe over the next 50 years, as cities renew infrastructure, we'll have to do that. Look at a sort of a dual water system where some of it's going to be potable for drinking and then some of it's going to be for other uses. Lots of buildings are doing this now, but on the city scale, it's hard to just full stop change all the infrastructure.
But in individual households, I mean, for instance, my spouse likes to have a clearing, and he's very much aware that the chloramines in the city water kill his fish. So he treats the water to stabilize, to remove the chloramines somehow, before he puts it in his tanks. And, you know, we think, well, I don't think the chloramines are that good for us either. So we filter all our drinking water.
Yeah. Well, I think that, you know, the chlorines and the chloramines, which is a byproduct of organics mixed with chlorines, they are not awesome for people, but it's a lot better than the pathogens that would be in the water if we didn't treat it. So I think, you know, it's a series of trade-offs that we'd probably be better off to have the water.
Yeah, there's also the really interesting problem that's occurring now in that, and I think this is going to change quickly because I think water treatment plants will be able to treat for more of these things, but one of the things that they're finding in river systems around the world is that the various things that we flush down the toilet, including drugs that people are on, all different kinds of meds, end up directly in our rivers because they can't be treated for. So you're finding all kinds of strange estrogen levels in fish where they're actually changing their sex. And I have a friend who works with amphibians, and the things that are, I mean, the number of legs that these frogs have and all. So, you know, one of the things that I believe strongly is that every single thing that we do is connected to something else. So this interconnectedness of our world is really, really important. We do one thing and it affects something else. So everything that we do is connected. The chlorine in the water kills your fish. It's like, yeah.
I was wondering if you've met any like political or governmental resistance when you do your projects at your various rivers around the world?
Did y'all hear the question was if I'd met any governmental resistance? Actually, no. And the reason is because, again, I've been incredibly fortunate. I am invited into communities to do this work. So I always work closely with the community, and the projects grow directly out of the dialogue with the people in the area, wherever I'm working. So I personally have not encountered any of that. But yeah, that's definite possibility anywhere. Yeah. I mean, I'm really scared right now, actually, in the United States, because what used to be the EPA, they're doing away with the Clean Water Act. You know, so where is that going to leave us? So it's really scary for me.
Yeah.
You know, as Susan said, I taught at the University of Waterloo for 17 years. My son lives in Vancouver. I tell you, I'm moving back to Canada. So, yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Yeah, back there.
Back there. Beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Really like that idea of combining art and presenting information. I remember actually being with a group of First Nations people by the South Saskatchewan River when the Husky oil spill happened, and we actually lit candles and left intention for the river to carry away. And I was trying to look up, there's a researcher whose name is Jacob Israel somewhere, and he studied the way that energy imprints on water. Like the idea that if you irradiate water with a certain magnetic frequency, and then you put bacteria in the water that has been irradiated versus the water that has not been irradiated. And this is a frequency, like some frequencies are beneficial and some are not. But this one was beneficial, and they found that the bacteria was able to multiply at double the rate. And if you want to Google that, it would be like Jacob water and genetic. He was like some sort of Nobel researcher on the way genetics change. But the amazing thing about that was, he said there is nothing different about the water. There's nothing different. The water is exactly the same that we can measure. There's no measurable, discernible difference. And yet we're seeing this amazing increase in fecundity. So it's almost as if this new information is coming in. I mean, there have been other, researchers and people who have written books about this idea that water can hold information and intention. So this idea that First Nations people have had so long, that water is actually sacred, like really sacred, not just sacred, but it actually contains an informational matrix from which all of life emerges in some mysterious, beautiful way, and that it remembers us every time we touch it. Just our touch is enough to instigate a change. So it's something that we really need to reconnect with water. I love your idea of making water. It is a living, conscious entity. So thank you.
Basia, do you want to respond?
No, I don't need to say anything.
Okay, up here.
So with that said, and you had mentioned that our river here doesn't have any protection, and then you had mentioned earlier about these other rivers just in the last month that are now seen as their own entity. And how can you give a little more, how the legislation of that?
Well, again, this
country,
is
or how we
very,
can-
it's very new, having just happened last month. So the Maori in New Zealand have been working for 140 years. It's not a new idea to them at all. They've been working for 140 years to try to get their ancestral river, the Wanganui, protected. And not only protected, but to make it a legal entity. So if anybody does anything to that river, if you pollute that river, you are taken to court and held liable for that. So it is as if that river were literally a living being, and just like a person can be taken to court. Now, and then they have overseers for this. So they have somebody from the tribe and somebody from the government who will oversee this law, and it is a law. It's interesting to me that almost immediately the same thing occurred in India with the Ganga and the Yamuna River, which I think is going to be a lot more difficult to try to uphold in a court of law. A lot of that is because there's such a long tradition of polluting those rivers hugely. But we were having a discussion about this at the meal the other day. There are things that are actually happening already in India, and one of them is that there are about 700 hotels along the Ganga who dump their sewage directly into the river. They are now being held liable for that, which in the past they couldn't be because there was no law. There was nothing saying you couldn't do this. So I think it's going to be really fascinating to see where this goes in the future and how it actually manifests.
Maybe two more questions? Yeah, one here.
This is more of an art question, but I'm just wondering, I'm an artist as well, and my art is about conservation of forests and also climate change. But
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last. Forest and
climate change.
Oh, good.
But I always feel like my audience, the people that come to my exhibitions or buy my work, are people that are already, I feel like I'm preaching to the converted. How, do you feel that way, or how do you entice that other side to come and see your work, or to get involved or be interested in it?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I've never been asked that before. But one thing that's interesting to me is with these blogs, it's reaching a very different audience than I would because it's on social media. And in fact, when we were up at the Delta, Chris, who is a scientist, came up to me and said, "Oh, I read your blog. I didn't realize that was you that had written that." So I think of all of the projects that we do as, like when it's raining and it falls into a pond and you have all those ripple effects going out. Personally, we don't have any idea what that effect is and where those circles are hitting other circles and what that reverberation is. All we can do is do the work and do the work as best we can. And I don't think we ever know really what that effect is going to be. So I don't know how to say in terms of preaching to the choir. I understand totally what you're saying. I think that, again, it's trying to reach out to as many different groups as we possibly can, and groups that we don't necessarily think would be interested. So one thing that I do feel strongly about is always including the Indigenous voice, wherever I am, wherever I'm working. In New Mexico, when I was working on the Rio Grande project, if I would go to a meeting and there was nobody from the Dene Res or from the Pueblos, I would leave. I mean, that's how strongly I feel about that. So.
One more question, Catherine?
So, as you said, things are looking bad for the environment, among other things, in the United States right now. But, you have this really unique blend of science and art and activism and engaging the communities in this. So, when I see the kind of resistance that's welling up in the United States in response to all of the terrible things happening there, it's really encouraging. So, you could flee to Canada, and I'd understand that, but you could also stay and really seize the opportunity. So I just wondered if you have any thoughts about, sort of looking, there's so many more, possibilities now and will be coming, to use your approach to activism to address what's happening in terms of the environment there.
Well, not just mine, but I want to address the song that you started out with about Standing Rock, because I think that's really important, what was going on there. And even though the pipeline is still going through, a lot of really amazing things came out of that. And one of the most recent things was that there were a group of Indigenous women, as a result of the work that was done there, who went to Europe, met with banks to try to get the banks to divest from the pipelines, and they have really been successful. So I really think, again, it's so interesting the way you have these tendrils. It's like in a delta, all of those various, streams coming down to form that delta in this dendritic way. And all of those actions help.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Basia, for joining us and giving us this great talk.
Before people disperse, to explain and invite anybody who didn't have their picture taken as you came in. This isn't like a media event at the back, it's actually a photo booth, and it's part of a public art project from the city of Saskatoon that Graham and I, Barb Reimer, and Alex George and Sam Rashik are involved with, called We Are the River. So it's an opportunity to see yourself on a billboard downtown holding a sign saying, I am the river, or we are the river, or I am 70% river water. So if you didn't get your picture taken already against the green screen, you can stop on your way out and have your picture taken, and these will be on a digital billboard on 25th Street in July and August. There's a banner there showing you where you might be if you partake. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming out, and thanks, Basia, so much for your talk tonight.